Hi everyone, welcome to this short time-lapse video of me painting some tulips in pastel. It was such a sunny day today that I fancied painting these tulips in my garden. I did consider picking them and putting them in a vase, but I thought they'll just die. So I took some photos and I worked from these photos. I'm using a piece of black Pastelmat. Now I must admit that's not my usual paper, but I had a sheet left and I quite liked to work on the black in this case because the colours of the tulips are really popping out in the sunshine, so I like the contrast of it. But I must admit Pastelmat's not my favourite paper because it doesn't take as many layers as some of the other papers. And as you will see, I do like painting in many layers. So you can see me setting up my my tulips onto the paper. I'm really looking for the main shapes and blocks and trying to fit it all on my paper. I'm doing a basic colour block in already just to figure out what goes where and how. Of course, this picture is all about colour. So instead of a value block in, which I very often use, this would be more of a colour block in. And I'm including the background very, very early on because, well, as you can see in the reference photo, it's not a very interesting background to take with me into this painting. But I don't want to make one up completely either, so I'm going to have to play around with it a little bit. So I will be putting in various background colours here and there just to see how it looks and see how it works, and hopefully I will come to some sort of conclusion near the end of my painting. So now I've done my colour blocking, I'm moving towards a slightly more form and shape in my painting. So I'm trying to find all the petals. So I'm going over the painting and just putting in the petals one by one. I'm painting very lightly. As you can see, I like hatching a lot. So it keeps the tooth of the paper quite open and it allows me to layer more later on. So I am hatching all the petals in very lightly, as light as I possibly can, and figuring out where everything goes. The pastels I'm using are polychromos pastels. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. They are very hard pastels, but recently I've been enjoying these hard pastels quite a lot. I used to work a lot with softer pastels, lots of Rembrandt pastels as well, but ever since I've had this box, I'm really enjoying it. And it also simplifies life a little bit to work with just one or two boxes of pastels instead of hundreds and hundreds of pastels. So I've got a box of these hard polychromos pastels in front of me. I've got some Unisons and some Rembrandts, and I've got my very soft Sennelier pastels right there as well, but I'll probably only use that in the later stages because those pastels are so soft it would really fill up the tooth quite quickly. So for now I am hatching with these hard pastels to try and build up the colour and build up the variety in colour and in values. I quite like that triangular shadow shape on that petal over there. This whole corner here looks quite interesting, so I'd like to keep it in. I rarely use the sides of my pastels because I'm hatching most of the time, but sometimes I use the sides for the background or for big shapes here and there. The format of my paper is slightly unusual, I suppose. I wanted a fairly small picture, and because the tulips are above one another, it would have ended up a longer picture, but wasn't actually planning to make it this long and thin, but it sort of ended up like that and I liked it, so I stuck with it. Now I'm really trying to push a variety of yellows out of my limited selection of yellow hard pastels. So I'm trying to mix in some oranges and some browns and some reds and some green here and there, really trying to see whether the shadows in the tulips, whether they're warm or cool, whether they have a brown tint or a green tint, whether it's just a warmer yellow or whether it's a cooler yellow. So I'm really pushing very hard to see variety in the red and the yellow. So I'm still layering the pastel on with my heart pastels, trying to find the edges here and there, figuring out what goes where, what needs to be sharp and what needs to be soft and blurry. Is that shadow of the petal there, does that have a green tint or a brown tint? It's somewhere in between, I suspect. Now the petals do have a white highlight here and there because there was a very bright sunshine on it, so I'm trying to add a little bit of white in it, but then I'm hatching over it with my yellow to blend it in a little bit. I'm very careful with white because I don't want to dull and chalk the colors too much. White can be quite tricky like that, and everything can become a little bit faint and as if it's covered in flour. So in this picture I want to push the colors, so I'm going to be very careful with white. Now again, I've got, just like the yellows, I've got a limited selection of reds, so I'm trying to hatch over layers and layers of red to try and get a little bit of variety in it. Now this petal here that comes towards us, right in the middle of the picture, has a lot, the colour of it is a lot mellower, a lot more pinkish. For some reason the colour in that is just a little bit duller than anywhere else. And while I'm painting, I'm not only looking for the variety in light and dark, cool and warm, but I'm also looking out for where the most chromatic colour is, where is the colour most saturated, and I will make sure that I will give that a push with a very soft pastel at a later stage, because the more variety I get into this picture and into the colours, the better it is. I'm trying to hatch towards the pattern in the petals, so these slight stripy motif that you see in the petals, and I'm hatching towards that just to get that transition as well as I possibly can. But I'm starting to notice that the tooth of this paper is starting to fill up, and my heart pastels might not take as well anymore, so I might have to move to some slightly softer pastels soon. I'm moving up this petal a little bit because I'm realizing it is a little bit too big. It needs to come up a little bit, and while I go along I do adjust shapes here and there as I go along. Drawing is never perfect, and things move and things change, but that's fine, that's okay, that's all part of the process. Now this petal here right at the front is a bit tricky because it's sort of moving towards us and to the left, and it's quite difficult to see what it's doing and where it's going. So you'll see me struggle a little bit with that petal to try and find a way to make it look right. Now some lovely warm highlights on the side of that petal, just a little flame of yellow inside the red of that petal there. Just chopping a little bit off the side because I made it too white, but I want to keep that little yellow highlight on that side because it's just really pretty. Adjusting the shape of the petal that comes toward us again, and noticing a little highlight at the bottom there. Still trying to push the colour, just layering colour over colour over colour, trying to get that yellow edge in again, that's in the shade, and blending in the highlights on the sunny side. So I'm just searching, trying again and again. I very often paint over areas again and again just to try and find the right effect that I'm after. And many of my paintings, it's just a matter of searching and trying, doing it again and again until I'm happy with what I've got. Adding a bit of brown there to that shadow side, making a little bit more orange, trying to get that golden highlight back in again. And there's some deep red under it, so we want that as well. Now that petal at the top has a really nice shape to it, it's really cut out, so I'm trying to add that as well because it's sort of in the center of the picture, and I want to really focus on that. It's a really nice flame shape. Now here I need to make a few decisions because the petal is sort of falling off the paper nearly, so I need to decide whether I'm going to let it fall off the paper or whether I'm going to bring it in just a little bit. Again, I'm using the softer pastels here. These are Sennelier pastels, so these are really buttery and soft, but as you can see, they give off lots of colour. They also fill up the tooth of the paper, so I have to be careful not to add too much because then I won't be able to continue anymore. Working some more on the background, just trying things out. A red background, would that work? Some darks here over there. I'm just going by the reference photo a little bit. I can see the colours are warm and brownish at the top and green at the bottom where the plants and the leaves are. So I'm following that roughly, but I don't want to literally copy the background, so I'm trying to find something in between. So I'm using the colours that I see, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more abstract. So I'm just trying things out, adding some black, and now just hatching over it to push it back a little bit. And just stepping back and seeing what it does and how it looks. So this is the more sort of creative and abstract side of this painting, because I need to figure out what to do with this background and how can I make a background that actually supports the tulips and really works and complements the tulips as well as I can. Right, back to the tulips itself, looking for the warmer areas in the petals, making some sharp edges over there. Being careful though, because you can see those really soft pastels, those bright vibrant reds that I added. They're so soft that if I go over it with a harder pastels, it really smudges and blurs, and it can get quite messy, so I need to be careful where and what I mix. Again, these are the soft pastels, so these are Unisons and Sennelier, just to push the colour as much as I possibly can and put the paint on nice and thick. Just realising that that shadow shape needs to be moved up, as does that petal. It needs to come down. I realise there's quite a strong diagonal going from the top flower right down to the bottom flower, and I'd lost that a little bit, so I'm just redrawing that, trying to get that shadow shape back in again and pushing the lights around it just to make sure it pops. See if I give it a lot of contrast. I'm just playing around again with the background. If I put a bit of black next to it and make the contrast really strong, I'll just have a look whether I like that or not. I might get rid of it later. So I'm just playing around and trying things out. Looking for these highlights wherever I can find them. Adjusting the colour of the shadows. Again with a nice golden coloured unison. And I'm blending it in a little bit with a slightly harder Rembrandt pastel. Again, as I mentioned before, this petal here at the front, I struggled with that a little bit. Wanted to make sure it reads okay, but I'm not totally convinced I managed it, but hey, I've done my best. And leaving the edge. So need to push the red inside the tulip a little bit more. Again, using a hard pastel for that because I can make much finer hatches with that, but where it's the most colourful, I grab the Sennelier pastel again, just to push it a little bit more. But of course the downside with these really soft pastels such as Sennelier and Unison is that they make much fatter marks. So you can't create tiny details or smooth transitions as easily or as quickly as you could with a hard pastel. But the downside of a hard pastel is that usually the colours are a bit less vibrant. So I'm trying to make that front petal as soft as I possibly can, make the transition to the red really soft. So I'm making very small hatches, almost just dots there, to make it a really soft looking petal. Now sometimes you need to go up quite close with your nose to the paper, and so my head comes in front of the camera, so I'm so sorry about that. But now and then you just need to look really carefully where your marks are landing, because these pastel sticks are so chunky and fat that you can't always see what you're actually doing unless your nose is almost on top of the paper. I'm trying to find the patterns in the petals, those lovely stripes that blend so softly from one colour to the next. I'm trying to get those in as well. Make sure that shadow has soft edges. And you can see by the speed of my hatching that these are very small hatches. I haven't sped this up any more than I did earlier in the video. So we're talking tiny little dots just to create a little bit of smoothness. You can see the red is sort of smudging things quite a lot. That's because that is the very soft pastel. There's so much paint and pigment in there that it easily smudges everywhere. Just lightening that shadow again with a bit of yellow. Cutting some sharp edges here and there where I think they are necessary. Oh, that highlight, that yellow golden highlight. We really need that. Push that yellow again and over there. I'm really fighting here with the tooth, which is full, so I am nearing the end of this painting because at some stage it just won't let me put down any more pastel. As you can see, I generally don't really blend much with my fingers because I prefer a much more textured look than a blended look, but I must admit now and then I do blend small areas of a painting, just again to create some variety in what you're seeing. Still fighting with that petal in the front, putting in some highlights and some shapes here and there, adding a bit of shadow there, and using a soft pastel again to push some colour in again. Now we still need to do that green in the middle, so I'm adding that as well. Find a fairly new Rembrandt pastel there with the wrapper still on. Obviously not used that much. And here I'm using my hard pastels with some white just to give a little bit of a highlight glow to things. Like I said, I'm very careful with the whites because it might dull the colours quite a lot, so I'm just using it here and there where the sun hits the petals. I keep on going back to that corner. Yeah, I'm trying to blend a little bit just here and there for a bit of effect. Careful that you don't use a dirty finger. But it's not always successful because on that petal I don't think it's that good. So I'm going over it again with my hard pastels to create a bit of texture. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and I really just vary it and try things out while I'm painting. See what happens. Just create some sharp edges there. And try to create a sharp edge there, which means I'm just messing it up because that corner is now quite dirty, so I need to redo that using quite soft pastels there just to save that from disaster. And I'm just noticing that sort of hole in the middle, that looks quite nice, and also realizing that the contrast of the tulip against the background in the reference photo is actually quite nice. The tulip is much darker than that plant pot in the background. So I'm just trying it out to see if I can get that darkness against a lighter background, just to see what would happen. So I'm adding some lighter colours to the background so I can try this out in that particular area. Realising it needs a little bit more green, and maybe this stem down below here needs a little bit more definition. But I want to go carefully because I don't want to paint what I see. I want to keep it fairly suggestive, which can be quite tricky because before you know it, you end up with some 1980s wallpaper with weird patterns. so that can be difficult, but I try, I play around, I move things and see where I end up. So I'm really nearing the end now. I'm fairly happy what we've got. I've got that dark edge there, which I quite like. I'm adding some sharp edges there on the left, which looking back I'm not quite sure was really necessary, but you know, you try things. Add a few more highlights here and there just to give it a bit more oomph. Well, I think that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed watching this demonstration, and if you got any comments or questions, do leave them in the comments below. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.